presentation is about radio, it's about hosting, and it's about going live. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you some things that I know, some things that I learned along the way, and of course, as with any radio person, I'm going to make up a few things as I go along as well. Well, safe to say that you appreciate just how much we're a part of a wonderful history of radio. You know, it goes back in time, back into the golden age of radio, as they called it, and it was there for every household throughout the land, for music, comedy, drama, you name it. And as the years went along, of course, radio did change because times changed as well. The advent of rock and roll made a tremendous difference to radio, where we had lots of live band shows and comedy shows. Suddenly, radio stations found that, wow, they could play some rock and roll music and make a pretty good living at it. DJs became a part of that new era of radio. Radio, over the years, continued to evolve, and we know today that mainstream radio is normally in large ownership blocks, where one organization like Bell or Rogers owns a group of radio stations or television stations. And satellite radio, which everybody thought was going to be the demise of local radio, still pretty soft in Canada, unlike the U.S., where it's pretty popular. Safe to say, the numbers show that community radio thrives, and it's growing. New stations are added, and new programming comes on, and of course, at Canoe FM, we're a good example of exactly how that works. We come from a very proud history. Started out in a very simple manner with a few very dedicated people who put their time, their effort, and a few bucks into the start of Canoe FM. And that history has grown over the last decade or so, and we've become a very important community resource. As a matter of fact, and we like to say, we're the most listened to radio station in the Haliburton Highlands. That's something that we hold very dear to ourselves. So let us ask ourselves the question, why is FM radio an important medium? Is it the music? Is it the information we share? Is it the host? What is it exactly? Well, actually, it's all those things, because when you think about it, radio, pure and simple, is entertaining. A well-known research company surveyed over 50,000 radio listeners right across North America to find out how and why people choose the media they do and why they choose to consume it. And it revealed 4 very important emotional triggers. People love having radio on while they're working or doing things around the house or driving, as we well know. Radio, just because of the kind of programming it is, really helps them get into a better mood. It provides a feeling of companionship. So if you're working out in the garage or out in the back 40, having the radio on is like having a friend nearby. And for a lot of people, radio offers an escape from the pressures of everyday life. So as you can see, radio is an important part of people's lives. So the key words for us to remember are companionship, picking up spirits, and providing an escape. I like to say, and I know I didn't originate it, it's been said a number of times before, radio is a visual medium. So when you think about it, people listening to radio are imagining what they're hearing. And that's the magic of radio. So when you're on the air and you're sharing some information, remember, people are imagining what you're like, what you're doing, and they sense from your voice exactly how you're feeling at that point in time. Now, we have to understand that radio is a medium where people listen and then they don't listen. As much as we might like to think that people are glued to our every word, glued to their radios, unfortunately, they're not. People will join you when they want to, and they will leave you when they want to. So you see, every quarter hour is important when you're on the air. You can't assume that when somebody arrives at the top of your show that they're going to be there at the end of the show. You have to be prepared for people coming in and going out. People will listen to you, but, well, I'm sad to say that they may tune out. And, of course, the thing that we fear most of all is that people might actually change stations. Ooh, that sends a shudder down your spine, doesn't it? So you see, our challenge is to connect with people, to be relevant, to be prepared, and along the way, to be entertaining. First and foremost, let's talk about making the connection. When you're on the radio and you're talking into the microphone, just remember, you're talking to one person, one-to-one, to the person on the other side of the radio. Doesn't matter if they're with their wife or their husband or friends, you're still talking to one person. And the best thing to do is to visualize them. Now, depending on the time of day that you're on the air, that picture will change. In the morning, they may still be in their dressing gown and have their slippers on. In the afternoon, they may be wearing their Halliburton formal winter wear, or they might be just sitting lounging in an easy chair. Try and picture them, visualize where they are, fill in the scene for yourself, and picture them smiling, that they're glad to be with you. If you do that, it's much easier for you to smile back. And when your microphone goes on, if you put on a smile, you can actually hear that. Can you hear me smiling? Yeah, of course you can. There are some points for you to ponder. And I think when you're preparing your show, it really helps if you consider who you are. So understand what your program is about. Each day part is a little different. Give it some thought, internalize it, and start to understand what you're doing there at that point of the day. Think about what's called for. Consider your voice, tone, and manner. And by all means, please enunciate. There's nothing worse than words that come out slurred, and we all do it now and again. We get moving on the air, and sometimes the words don't come out just as we would like them to, but move your lips and enunciate your words. It really helps. Now, when we're talking about the tone and manner, you can be very personal if you wish, or you can be very bright and cheery, or you can be very, very serious. So depending on what you're doing, consider how you want that person to perceive you. Now, of course, most important is to be ready to do your preparation. Walking into the studio without having given any thought to what's going to happen in your program, oh boy, that can be tough work. It makes the work harder for you and makes it hard on your audience as well. So by all means, do your preparation, whether that's 10 minutes or 15 minutes, or if you've got a fairly complex program, it could be an hour or more. And I think one thing that really helps is if we mentally rehearse what's going to happen. And you do that throughout your program, actually. When the microphone's off, you're thinking about what's going to happen next, what song's coming up, are there things that you need to do, and you mentally rehearse in what order you're going to do those things. And if you're going to tell a joke or a funny story or share some humorous aside, figure out where that's going to be and exactly what that's going to sound like. I like to suggest to people, and I think you probably know it, that it's really good to hear what's going on. So please use your earphones properly. Make sure you have enough volume that you can hear everything that's going out over the air. The balance between you, the music, the commercials, it's really important to use your earphones. And it helps you to make a smoother flowing program. Well, it's not just about the music. Well, certainly the music is most important, and we're pretty lucky having a fine music committee that does a great job in selecting our music and keeping it up to date, refreshing it on a regular basis. We know music is important, but it's also about the information. Before you go on the air, have a look at what you're going to be talking about. What are the things in the book that are telling people about events that are going on? What is it about the road report? What is it about the weather? What's really current in the news? Think about the information that you're going to share. It's also about your creative input. So beyond the obvious information side, what would you like to share that makes the program more interesting? And of course, it's also about your connection to the listener. And this is something that we all work at every time we open the microphone. We're trying to connect with that person. We're trying to reach out and engage them in what we're sharing. Because entertainment is not just about the music, it's about all these other things that we've just described. And of course, it is always all about the listener. Listeners like you to talk to them about things they care about and stories they can relate to. So when you're going to share a humorous story, think about the audience. Is this going to connect? Is this something that they can relate to? Make sure that you execute your breaks with strong content and be as compact as possible. That creates more impact for the listener. What that means is if you're going to do a public service, make sure that you're not listing off 5 or 6 at a time. Well, that's not what we're supposed to do. But if you've got 1 or 2, make sure that content is strong and that you're able to communicate it with all the enthusiasm that you can muster, and try and keep it as tight as possible. Don't keep repeating information. Say it once and move on. It's kind of nice to be able to say, that's the date, that's the place, and if you repeat that, well, that's okay. But after that, the listeners already heard it. One thing that people don't enjoy is somebody that knows it all. You've got to be careful because listeners do get tired of hosts who are a little preachy. We all have our different sides of life, and we all have our experience bases. So you got to be careful. You're talking to an audience that has a lot of knowledge, a lot of background, and you just may come off sounding like a know-it-all. We wouldn't do that, would we? I know this is kind of a preachy presentation, but bear with me. One thing when you're on the air, please try not to be distracted. Now, when you're on the air, it's hard work, and it's really important to concentrate on what's going on around you. You've got the 2 computer screens, you've got the board, you've got the information book, phones may be ringing. There's a lot going on. So if you're being distracted by visitors or phone calls coming in, it can really show on your program. Always plan for your next break. While the song is on, be thinking about what's going to happen next. Be planning it. That way, you're in control of the program. It's also good to be thinking about your music. You see, in any given program, we all have music styles. And what you might play in the morning could be very well different from the early afternoon. And it's good to make sure that when you look at the list of music that's coming up, that there's a a sense, a feel to it, that there's not these wide discrepancies between heavy rock and old standards. Listeners get a little confused by that, and that's one of the occasions when people very likely just might tune out. So be consistently thinking about the music and how it lines up on your program. We say you should be shaping your music. So you're looking at what's coming up in the hour, and every so often, you're going to get one or two clangers that don't fit, and that's just because the computer program is that way. Try and keep the sound you'd like to share with listeners. Work your music list. Work it hard. Preparation, as we've already said, is important, and I tend to think it's absolutely key. Knowing what's happening locally, reading the papers, checking online, knowing what major events are coming up, and who are the people in the news. Look to your online resources as well for news and information, as well as the people's sites. And if you line up the sites in an order, so when you're doing your prep, you kind of hit site number 1, and then site number 2, and down the list until you find the items that you're looking for. It saves you time, and it also gets your mind kind of organized in a direction for your program. Interviews are a key part of Canoe FM, and many of you are doing some great work on interviews, and I think everybody can agree that the important thing about interviews is being prepared. It's really important to do your homework and do your background work. Write it down, organize it, so you know what the topic is that you're going to be covering. And I suggest that you line up your 10 best questions with some sort of flow to them. So you start out at the top of the interview and you work your way down through it, and you know exactly where you're going. Now, when you're asking questions, try not to answer them. Keep your own experiences to a minimum, because the guest is there to share their information. So please make it about the guest. And it's important, as you're doing your interview, to be listening to your guest and be ready, because the guest may change direction on you, and if you stay focused on the conversation, you're able to change direction with them. It's really interesting. If you have your 10 questions, quite often a guest will cover 2 or 3 of those questions all by themselves without any assistance from you. So be prepared to change direction. Now, when you're done with the guest, say thank you and then get back to business. Remember, it's all about your listeners. So when you're completed an interview, thank the guest very much. This is when you're off air, of course. Thank the guest very much and tell them you're glad to have supported their endeavor and wish them all the best with it. Try and ease them out of the studio gently, because the longer you carry on with the after conversation, the less you're focusing on your program and the less you're focusing on your listeners. Commercials and promos. When you have a promo and a commercial in a set, remember, the commercial always gets played first. The reason for that is, well, the sponsor has paid for the airtime, and the promotion is usually a station promotion or some other contest type thing, and that gets the second spot. So commercials always go at the front of a set. Now, it's good to try and spread them out. Sometimes the computer will gang up the commercials and promos in the middle of the hour, and it's really good to spread them out through the hour. Try not to play 3 commercials or promos in a row. It gets pretty hard for the listener and not as entertaining as you might like it to be. So if you spread them out and look at that hour, you can do a good job in keeping the listener's attention. Public service announcements. Well, of course, before you read the PSA, make sure you've read it. Make sure you understand what it's about. People send in PSAs in all different formats, and unfortunately, there's no set way of doing it, so it's up to you to understand what the PSA is about and to try and paraphrase it so it sounds like you're sharing something you know something about. When you read it verbatim, it sounds like it, and it's not very entertaining. It's good to listen to radio. Now, I know you probably listen to Canoe FM and you know what's going on with other hosts, and that's good. That's important to know, and it's nice to be able to share what's coming up with various hosts on their programs, what specials they've got, what guests they've got. Cross-promotion is a great thing to do. But we should be listening actively to other stations as well. Hopefully some stations you like and some hosts that you enjoy listening to. And if you do a little active listening, you can learn a lot. Listen to those hosts. Listen to how they do things. And you might be able to borrow some hints from the way they conduct themselves. And it's not bad to catch our friendly competition now and again. I think if you catch Moose FM, that way you're aware of what the friendly competition is doing, what kind of promotions they're running, the kind of patter, the kind of music, and it gives you a sense of how we're different and how we're important to our listeners. Every so often, once a month, once every other month, really nice to air check yourself and have a listen to how you're doing. And Ron can help you with that. You take an hour of your show and cut out the music and just listen to how you come off the music, how you handle that break, and how you enter into it. I know it's a very frightening thing, but we learn an awful lot from ourselves, and we learn what we'd like not to do and what we'd like to keep doing. So air check yourself now and again. When you're in the studio, it's very important to be comfortable. Being able to have the proper sitting posture is really important because, first of all, it helps to keep you alert, and it helps with your breathing as well. Being able to get out sentences without taking a breath in between is all about having proper posture. Now, one or two people have taken to trying to stand when they do their show, and good for you if you can do that. But for most of us, we like to sit down, but make sure that you're high enough in the chair, and whether you want arms on the chair or not, whatever's comfortable for you. But make sure you have proper posture when you're on the air. Be organized in the studio. I know we use a lot of paper, but if you organize your paper in the same way, show after show, it helps you be more confident because you know where the various pieces are that you're going to want to deal with. And every so often as the show's going along, sit back, take a deep breath, think about how it's going and how you're going to continue for the next portion of the program. Really helps to take that longer view now and again. A number of hosts are promoting their show online, and that's a good thing to do. Facebook and Twitter are great media for letting listeners know what's coming up. If you've got a guest coming on, if you've got a special feature, make sure that you're doing something to let people know. And that can be on the Canoe FM website, Canoe FM Facebook, it can be on Twitter. If you'd like a little help, talk to Linda Heaps. She'll be glad to give you some assistance in that regard. But promoting your show is good for you and good for your listeners. Those of us on the air at Canoe FM really want to do a good job. And let's face it, that's why we do it. We want to create good radio. We want to share with our community and give them some entertainment along the way. And for ourselves, we want to have some fun. Well, if you're having fun and creating good radio, then you've hit a home run, because that's what it's all about. So I told you at the outset that I would share some things I know, share some things I learned, and make up a few things along the way. I hope it's been helpful. Here's to you and good radio and Canoe FM.